Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hi, everyone. Thank you for dropping into the podcast today. I hope you are doing well. We have a really excellent and interesting conversation today with Diana Zotos Florio, one of the founders of Threes Physiyoga. We talked a lot about awareness and embodiment, as you know, some of my favorite topics, and how both yoga and physical therapy principles can complement each other. And I also asked her why so many people feel that their hips are tight. So you might want to listen. This is a pretty interesting answer. So I think you will get a lot out of this episode. And next week we'll be taking a short break since I will be on a silent retreat. That means there won't be a new episode then because I won't be available to publish one. But I am doing an interview tomorrow before I go on retreat with a mindful movement and Qigong expert that I've been really excited to talk to. I was so happy that she was willing to come on the podcast, and I'll let it be a little bit of a surprise, but I'm really looking forward to sharing that one with you soon. If you're looking for opportunities to practice together, my next live stream mindful yoga class series is coming up starting July 21st. The theme for that 6-week series is going to be Get Grounded. So we'll be doing a lot of lower body awareness, grounding through the feet, strengthening the hips and legs, working on our balance, and nervous system practices to help contribute to that sense of being steady, present, and grounded. The info is on the live stream page of my website, which is movedtomeditate.yoga, so you can find it there. And there is also the Mindfulness Meditation Practice Circle for yoga, wellness, healing arts, and caring professionals. And that is a 6-week practice group that's beginning on July 26th. And it's basically for anyone who holds space for others and identifies with some of the sort of professions or occupations that I mentioned above and wants to feel refreshed through mindfulness practice and community. It's also at movedtomeditate.yoga on the live stream classes page if you're curious. And lastly, I want to mention that I will soon be announcing a new teaching mindful movement training that will launch this fall. It's still in formation and even the title may change, but I am assembling some brilliant guest teachers and I'm just too excited to not go ahead and mention it to you. The details and the application should be up on my website in the next few weeks. And it's really a project that I have been kind of formulating and cooking in my brain for years. So I'm finally going to bring it to life, and it's going to be for yoga teachers looking to offer a more contemplative mindfulness-based practice, and also for mindfulness teachers who are seeking skills to more confidently lead movement in their meditation classes. So stay tuned if you're interested in some support on leading people through movement practices that really center mindfulness. So, okay, lots going on and so much coming up. And without further ado, let's hear this conversation with Diana Zotos Florio. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast today. So I am here with Diana Zotos Florio, who is the founder of Threes Physiyoga. And we're going to be talking about all kinds of things today, I think, but a lot about the intersections of physical therapy and yoga, which is what her work is about. So I'll read you just a little bit about Diana before I ask her to speak about this herself. But Diana's teaching and treating philosophy combines yoga and physical therapy to provide patients and clients with relief from pain, knowledge about their body, and a healthy way to attain and maintain muscular and joint health, physical fitness, strength, and flexibility. Diana is driven by addressing injury and pain by looking at the whole body and mind for root causes and treating it using mindfulness, breath, and movement. So this sounds like such a life project and such a wonderful intersection of different modalities, Diana. Can you tell us a little bit about how threes Fizzy Yoga started? And I'm really curious about the threes part. Where does the threes come from? I understand the fizzy and the yoga, but what would you like to tell us about threes Fizzy Yoga?
Sure, Addie. First, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you and your audience. I'm so very happy to be here and to share this. So Threes is the name of our company, and Physiyoga is what we do. So Threes sort of refers to how we're really looking at people in a mind, body, and spirit approach. Those three pieces to being, yeah. And but it also carries over to other things. Like we teach about the tripod foot. There's 3 points of contact with the earth through the feet. We also teach about the tripod hand, the 3 points of contact. We teach a triangle of how we teach movement, and that we teach movement through first awareness, then sensing the breath, then actually doing the action of movement. And we've all these different threes in Threes Physiyoga. The teacher training curriculum itself is also broken down into 3 components: knowledge foundations, which is all of that rich physiology and anatomy; assessment, which is movement, and also sort of a biopsychosocial spiritual assessment; and then restoration techniques that are based in Physiyoga. So those are all the different threes that make up why we call ourselves threes.
I love that. There's a really rich reason there. I'm glad I asked.
Yeah. It's been on my to-do list to write a blog about that forever, I think.
I was like, are there 3 founders, or is there a place called Threes? I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
It's a much better answer than that.
There is also a really great beer brewery in Brooklyn called Threes, which was very cool to see and hear about, and did sort of give us the guts to name ourselves Threes as well. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And so how did we start? Oh, man. Physiyoga kind of came about through 2 parallel paths between Emily and I. We also did found or start to write the curriculum for Physiyoga with Helen O'Neill, who lives in London. But I like to highlight how, as I was a physical therapist, and so was Emily, we both were PTs at New York's Hospital for Special Surgery, which is a specialty musculoskeletal orthopedic hospital in New York. Mm-hmm. We were both practicing yoga, and then we both became yoga teachers. And it wasn't really until I had made my way through all different sections of the hospital, as did Emily, where we were doing sort of inpatient joint rehabilitation patients. And then we were doing ambulatory same-day patients. And we both made our way into sports medicine. And then finally, HSS asked me to open up a clinic for them in one of New York's biggest investment banks. So we were inserting a physical therapy clinic into an investment bank. And yeah,
that's unusual.
It is, but it's a model that's growing, and it's really smart from a productivity standpoint to engage employees in taking care of themselves without losing time away from work.
To bring the service to them.
That's right. Make it easy.
I like it.
Yeah. So I saw a lot of patients there. And what was interesting to me was a very homogeneous population. Type A driven bankers, type A driven, and even the support and technology people, type A driven, worked really hard during the week and then maybe did some exercise on the weekends. High levels of stress from like a sense of, deadlines and projects and the urgency to compete and do well. And I started realizing that people would come down with pain all sorts of pain, low back pain, shoulder pain, neck pain. And it became evident pretty early on that their pain wasn't attributed to a specific tissue or joint trauma. It was more attributed to what was happening in their life, those sort of perceived threats to their survival of competition, deadlines, emails. And then when I started realizing that, I started shifting how I treated them and really started to bring in some of the tools of yoga that I found very valuable, mainly awareness to myself, to my body, down regulation practices through breathing and mindfulness, getting connected to my body, actually feeling my body. And I would tell you 50-60% of my patients, I would begin just with breathing. Like, let's lay down, let's put our hands on our rib cage and let's breathe. And you just kind of start to see that tension melt away, and then the freedom of mobility increase, just because you're affecting the nervous system first instead of the body. And so I was doing this, and I would start sending my patients home with, instead of home exercise programs where it'd be like 3 sets of 10 of leg lifts and shoulder raises, I would send them home with movement practices that they maybe moved through a series of movements where there was intentional cueing to have them stay connected to their body throughout. It wasn't about the reps and it wasn't about the sets, but it was about the connection and the fluidity of the movement and awareness. So as I'm doing this, I'm getting more and more private clients where I'm seeing people all over New York City, one of which is Kim Cattrall. And once I start treating Kim Cattrall, everything starts to explode.
Right.
So
Word
there's
gets
some
out.
word gets out. So press gets written. Kim needs to go to London to film a play or to be in a play. I connect with Helen O'Neill, who is in London, who works just like I do. And her and I get together and start writing down, dumping our brain. What are we doing? We're doing all this whole person, whole mind, body work together. So let's start writing it down. And so Helen and I started writing down how we see the body as a whole person, a whole being, not just the mind, not just the breath, but like, how is the foot actually connected to the low back? So these are some of the pieces of the puzzle. We're writing all this down. At the same time, Emily, my partner, is taking what she's learned and she's starting to teach yoga teacher training schools about what we know in physical therapy that makes movement safe. So she's taking the kinesiology, the biomechanics, the physiology, and then she's layering in the systems of the breath and the mind and teaching yoga teacher training schools and elevating their teaching. So then Emily, Helen, and I come together and we start really refining what is now probably more like a 300-hour curriculum of Physiyoga education. And it began as teacher training, which we've done, I always forget, I think 6 teacher trainings, and it expanded to this online platform that we have now.
That's amazing. And I really like this like organic origin story of how you realized that you couldn't use necessarily like some of the standard protocols for treating an injury when you had these, corporate workers who were just feeling pain in their bodies from the stress and from the environment they were in and from the nervous system dysregulation that it causes. So that seems like such a natural place that you identified to start bringing in some of the tools of yoga and mindfulness. And so that touches on, I think, a little bit of what yoga might add to a physical therapy practice. Is there more that you would say about that? Like what yoga actually contributes to a physical therapy process?
One aspect that we teach about is sort of the yoga of being a physical therapist. So when you work in a physical therapy clinic and you are not on your own, and you are taking insurance, physical therapists are running from patient to patient to patient. You may have 4 patients an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And
You may be moving from one back and forth to another, or
that's right.
yeah.
Yeah. And so you're trying to manage multiple people's pain and rehabilitation at the same time. And I think that gets a little challenging for PTs and for patients.
It's hard to be
So
present with someone in
that's
that
exactly right.
setup, right?
That's exactly right. Um, so we kind of teach our yoga teachers when they're doing one-on-ones, and this carries over to PTs as well when we've taught PTs, something called space. So before you interact with your patient that first time they come, they're coming in and maybe they're a few minutes late, and they're always late, and you have this sort of feeling in your gut, oh, here they come, they're late again, they're not respecting my time, I'm so frustrated with them. Right? You've got this running narrative, but we're saying, space, meaning stop. So stop the narrative, stop the story, come into the present, pay attention to what this person's telling you, really be present, accept what they're saying, don't judge it, don't label it as complaining, as the same story over and over. And then contemplate, give yourself a minute to really think about what's the appropriate next move with this person's interaction. Is it just listening, or is it, okay, like we'll pivot today, instead of going right into exercises, maybe we need to sit and do breathing for a few minutes and then execute, make that move that forward. So I think the presence in yourself as a physical therapist is one piece that yoga really taught me, and that we try to teach our PTs and our yoga teachers when we run them through our training. And so I think that that's really a part of it, is, can you be really super present with that person? Can you not sort of be rote in your therapeutics? Can you not just look at your notes and run them through piece by piece by piece, but give them your full attention?
I love that. And that sounds so much more nourishing and healing for the client as well, and that you're looking at them and how they enter the room, and if they're late or whatever, it's all information about their current state. And then if you can see that and take that into account, you can do a better job with actually addressing what's up for them in the moment. And I think that's amazing to take, the knowledge that you have, the technical knowledge, but also just use it in real time with humans in a way
Yeah,
that meets them where they are. And I was thinking too, like something that yoga I think contributes to a rehabilitative process like physical therapy, because I've had clients, like yoga students, come to me when they're kind of just finished a course of physical therapy perhaps, and they're kind of shifting into yoga therapy with me. And um, one of the things is, like, they'll have their list of exercises, and it's kind of like 10 of this, 5 of that, do 4 reps, blah, or this many rounds of it. And they get really bored with it after a while. And I think that, yoga can actually create more of a practice out of it, so that it's more interesting and easier, more meaningful, and helps people to sustain the maintenance of their body in a way that I think, like, just a list of exercises doesn't necessarily accomplish.
absolutely. 100 million and 50 million% agree. We see PT as sort of episodic, and
Hmm.
you go to PT when you're hurt. Like, there's this negative
Yeah.
connotation around it. People don't want to go. You don't want to go to somewhere 3 times a week and do the same exercises
And we
over and over.
associate it with being in pain.
We associate it
Like,
with being in
ouch,
pain. Yeah. So
being forced to move through something painful. And
yeah.
yeah.
And we see Physiyoga as somewhat a way to help you heal and recover, but also could be a very preventative way of life. PT is really boring, and the Physiyoga flows and the Physiyoga classes and the Physiyoga homework that we would give people would be very specific to their issue, with a lot of cues that would be somatic and embodied, that they
Hmm.
could take with them into their life. So, for example, you've got someone who's got front anterior shoulder pain, And part of their Physiyoga program may be focused on letting the scapula do its job. You know, a lot of people overgrip their scapula. So letting the
Hmm.
scapula be super floaty. And so that socket for the ball is being able to move a bit more, and maybe that's going to help the ball be centered in the socket, which can help decrease anterior frontal strain. And so I may teach someone in their Physiyoga flow to imagine their scapula floating like air hockey pucks on an air hockey table. This like thin layer of air. Turn the air hockey table on. And then allow your scapula to roll up and down when you bring your arms overhead. So if you're doing Urdhva Hastasana, and then take that with you into downward dog. Continue to float the scapula. And that's your Physiyoga homework. But hey, remember when you go to reach for that coffee cup in that cabinet above your head, remember that somatic cue that's yours, float the scapula. And so Physiyoga is really based in a lot of motor learning neuroscience principles. And so repetition, tapping into neuroplasticity by bringing people to be internally aware, and then continually re-grooving the brain to move a bit differently. That's how we bake in the science into the practice.
In a way that's kind of more creative and relatable, I think, and it gives people enough knowledge of what's going on that they probably feel more motivated and more connected to what they're doing and why they should pay attention to it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Is not just saying I'm going to give you a set of movements that are going to make your muscles stronger, but I'm going to teach you to be aware of how you've been moving, why that may or may not be contributing to your pain, and we'll find ways together to unravel it.
I think that's so important because so many times we lay people will go to a medical provider and hear some kind of diagnosis without much explanation, and people don't necessarily understand what they're being told about their body, and they don't necessarily have the resources to like go look stuff up and make sense of it, and it can be scary, and I think that itself can contribute to pain and can be really daunting to even like figure out how to address it and what to do with it, and to have light at the end of the tunnel that it could get better. So I think you're doing a lot of work, educating people about how the body works and what's going on, and that's huge.
Yeah, that really it brings me a lot of joy. It kind of puts together all the things that I love, which is sort of the science of the body, but also helping people. And I think making the body and the way that the body works simple is very approachable. And I think when people understand, then they're a bit more motivated to take those next steps to feel better and to invest in themselves. I think there's a lot of emphasis on I got hurt, now I have to stop doing what I love.
Mm.
If it gets bad enough, I'll go to the doctor, or maybe I'll just take this pill or use this Theragun or buy this brace. Right? There's the culture of the band-aid, right? How can I fix this and spend some money and do it as quickly as possible without investing a lot of my own time and energy?
Hmm.
Part of our mission is to really educate people to shift that perspective a bit into something that's more holistic and that will do a better job at sustaining your body to do what it wants to do for longer. So by teaching people how to move to support their joints, their muscles, their nervous system, their breath, to teach people how to move efficiently, we will in fact help people get hurt less, and we will help people recover from injury. But it takes time because it is a sort of a neural repatterning, but it is a worthwhile investment of your time because you'll be able to do what you love for longer, whether it's gardening, playing with your grandkids, doing yoga practice, CrossFit, whatever it is. It's the quality of the movement and the mind that really will influence how often you have to reach for those Advil or Theragun, and hopefully we can get you to not reach for them at all.
Yeah, because you can head off things at the past, and you can treat root causes if you can identify them sooner. And this is, what I hear you saying about like how our healthcare system and like just our cultural mindset is set up is that physical therapy is something you do when there's something broken and you want to fix it. Big air quotes on the fix.
Yeah.
And that there's a possibility of like assessing the body before it hurts, and maybe like taking care of understanding your patterns and moving in ways that are friendly to your body and that can help you feel good before a problem occurs. And I think that's an amazing message to be putting out there, because I don't know that we look at movement that way. I think movement has been wrapped up in so many other things like fitness or weight loss or, fixing an injury, right? So, can you say a little bit more about, how you look at movement practice and like what it's for and what its possibilities are? You've touched on this already, so I just
um,
really want to underline it.
yeah. I mean, oh man, I think I tell everyone I see and meet to move and to lift weights and to do mobility. I think movement is an amazing practice that not only, can help you achieve goals of getting stronger or potentially trying to lose weight, although it's not a great thing to speak about and not a great goal to have, or to get more mobile or more flexible. But I think movement is like a lifestyle. I think movement is something we should celebrate in all aspects of our lives and our days. Um, I think about movement and I think about how my body is moving when I'm doing my own exercise practice, but I also think about it when I'm doing the dishes. I think about it when I'm playing with my kids. I think about paying attention to my body, using my interoception to sense my muscle tone, my heart rate, my breath, my feet. Can I feel my feet? What parts of my feet do I feel? My pelvis when I'm squatting, what's happening in my pelvis, my pelvic floor, my diaphragm, my respiratory muscles, my rib cage. I think it's a beautiful thing to connect your awareness to how your body is moving. And that is a powerful tool for nervous system regulation and modulating our stress response. And that is a huge part of health. I think of the quality of movement as something that we evaluate and we teach yoga teachers to evaluate. Is movement rigid? Does it look restricted? Does it look like people are holding tension as they're going into a squat or moving into a twist or a cat spine or a cow spine? We teach people to assess movement in yoga asana that we've developed and have done some reliability studies on, because we want to look at how people move. We want to look at what someone does when they lower down into a squat pose. And then we want to notice how they control their body, how they control their feet and their ankles and their knees. And can we make changes in that? And does that change contribute to ease and efficiency? So we do tests and retests. So for example, if someone's doing a squat and they have 2 feet that look very similar, but as they're squatting, you could see that the right ankle rolls into pronation. And so now their weight is shifting to the left, and potentially changing how the knees are loaded and the hips are loaded and the spine is loaded. So what if we bring some awareness? Say, okay, hey, check it out. Did you know that your right ankle rolls in when you squat? Could you potentially think about paying attention to the whole tripod of your foot as you squat? Maybe put a little bit more weight on that pinky toe as you squat. And then have that person do that. And then it's not about preventing injury, but it's about, how does that feel? Does that feel different now? Does it feel more easeful? What does that feel like in your knees, in your hips, in your back? What's that feel like in your breath? So just, again, bringing people's awareness to their body and potentially teaching them different, more easeful, efficient ways to move. And in turn, potentially may help change the way the body loads tissues, but we can't really say for sure that it's going to prevent injuries. There's so much conflicting science on that.
Mm-hmm.
But we can say it's going to change the way the body moves, the way the muscles work, the way that the tissues and tendons and the joints get loaded. That was a
And
long answer to your
no, I
question.
like that. And the first piece of what you were saying really was a lot about how these practices can become more than just like a 30-minute thing or an hour thing that we do once a day or 3 times a week or whatever. And it starts to carry over into our life and brings an element of embodied mindfulness into our day, that we start to notice, like, what's it like when I kneel down here on the floor to get this, to pick up this toy, or I reach up here to get this teacup. And that our practice becomes continual and really grounded in the body. And I love that it gets us away from that, like, oh no, it's broke, let's fix it mentality. And it just helps us to be like more alive in our body and caring for the body, in a more ongoing way.
Yeah, I think there's so many people, and we've looked for science on this, but we do believe that we sort of like live in this disembodied era, and that disembodiment, not like out of body, but disembodiment, living in your brain and in the stories and in the narratives, is a form of trauma, and it's a disconnect from really what's happening. We've seen so many patients and clients where it's, my hip has been hurting me for 10 years and I've went to all these different PTs and doctors, but it's this pain and I've had it and I don't think it's ever going to get better. And it's just part of me. And this is my bad hip.
Hmm.
And, no matter what, I don't think you can fix it. It's part of me. It's my bad hip. I've had it for years. And my dad had a bad hip. My cat had a bad hip. It's like the story gets so baked in with all these different layers, that sometimes just breaking that down, doing some interoceptive work can really start to be extremely difficult initially, but it can really start to like break apart those layers of story and get us a little bit more embodied. It's a
Because we start
beautiful
to
thing.
relate to the actual sensations that are occurring.
Yes.
I just did an episode about embodiment, and I was talking about top down versus bottom up
Oh yeah,
processes. And I
we
think
love it.
that's, yeah, I think that's part of your work too. Do you want to
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit?
Yes. Absolutely. We teach about this, and this is like Emily's wheelhouse. She loves to teach about top down, bottom up. Um, Top down is like executive control, right? Like if you're working in a team with someone, if you have, your executive on top, they're just telling you everything what to do, and you as a team are just implementing it, and
There's
it's
a
not
hierarchy.
collaborative. There's a hierarchy. It's not collaborative at all. It's do what I say. Bottom up is much more collaborative. You're receiving information from all of the team players, and then the information is assessed, and then you make a decision based upon all of that information. Sometimes we get stuck processing life on either top down or bottom up. And sometimes it gets really hard to explore life in the other one.
Because
We
we
talk
need
about,
both.
we need a healthy mix of both. Top down is faster and more efficient. Bottom up is slower, but explorative and rich. Bottom up is how we can start to make new movement patterns. Bottom up is how we can do something called extinction learning,
Mm.
where, so I come back to that Utkatasana person who was pronating the right ankle. So what if I cue them to land more on the tripod and now they're more neutral? As if they're paying attention to their body and how that experience feels. Over time, by doing a lot of repetition of this new pattern, and the body through interoceptive awareness saying, hey, that does feel really easeful. That is actually more efficient for me, a way for me to get down. over time, that older pattern will start to become extinct. But you have to bake it in a ton of repetition and a ton of awareness and focus. But bottom up is how we can use extinction learning to learn to move in better ways.
We can like phase out a pattern that's not so useful to us anymore.
That's 100. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. And top down is sort of like, well, this is how we've always done it. We're going to continue to do it like this. We're always going to do it like this. Yeah. It's a lot less explorative.
It's when that story is in charge. The like, this is my bad hip. It's been like this
That's
forever.
right.
It's genetic. I think it's genetic. Or I had this injury when I was 15. It's always been like this. And
Right.
here are all the reasons why I'm not going to get better.
Right. I mean, sometimes it's effective, right? If you need to go to the store and you are, making a pie and you realize you're out of butter, you're going to want to take the short way. You're going to take the most direct way to get the butter, right? You need
Mm-hmm.
to act quick. That's top down. But if you have an extra time on your hands and you want to go to the store to get butter, and you say, hey, maybe I'll take the long way today and I'll like look out the window and explore. And that's more bottom up, taking the long way to the end goal to get a little bit more information.
Mm.
Yeah,
Because you might learn something unexpected, right? New possibilities.
that's right.
Yeah. So that makes so much sense with, your basis in like motor learning and nervous system, and you can't rewire the brain by doing the same thing from the brain's perspective that it's always done. If you're going to change a habit, you have to kind of open up the scope of possibilities, and that's how we do that, from that bottom up kind of fumbling around, feeling around, sensing kind of place where we don't totally know with clarity, but we're checking it out.
That's right. That's 100% right. And that's how kids learn. Um, that's how kids learn to move. There's a lot of fumbling and falling and getting back up again and trying it again and doing it in different ways and just being open to explore and play and giving them different ways to accomplish the task and them figuring out the best way that works for them.
And it's a little bit of like letting go of certainty or the desire for perfectionism, or kind of like the getting it right.
That's right.
And I think that can be hard for those of us who teach or guide others in any kind of movement practice, because we want to like offer the best thing that we possibly can. And I think in yoga a lot of times there's concerns about like, how do we make it the safest it can be, and there's all these different styles of yoga, and different people are trained different ways and different opinions on this. Like, is it because we have perfect alignment that makes us safe, or is it like the perfect sequence, or we just like avoid these dangerous poses, or is it because we know enough about anatomy? What do you think about safety in a yoga practice? And I love asking this to a physical therapist. Like, what do you think are some of the elements that make it more likely to be like a safe kind of
Mm.
yoga practice?
I think making sure people understand the difference between a sensation of stretch, work, and then pain is important.
Mm,
Yeah. So just,
that's interesting.
yeah, being a little bit explorative with effort and saying, feel how hard this effort is in your legs or your arms. Um, does that just feel like muscular work? Are you getting tired? Or is there a sort of sharp shooting pain somewhere? Same with stretch. Stretch, you know, shouldn't feel like something's going to break or pop or burn or pins and needles. And just sort of making people aware of what things should not feel like and should feel like. Um, Another thing we do is we sort of uh, we break poses into pieces and build them up. I'm trying to think of a simple example. Um, but if we were going to do like a complicated pose, like a revolved triangle or something, um, if I ever would teach that in a yoga class, I would, start with, this is what tripod feet are. Now, see how when you're in tripod feet, knees and your femurs aren't rolling in or out. We want to try to keep that tripod foot as our base. Now, if you can't keep that, as we start to move into that forward fold prep, that hinge for revolve triangle, well, then maybe you're going to need to put your hands on a chair or a block. Maybe you're going to need to bend your knees a little bit. And then we take it next step. Okay, so now let's play around with what the pelvis is doing. And if you can keep your pelvis in sort of over your legs and not overly rotating past your legs, so you're not sort of decentralizing your femurs, your hips, balls, well, then we can stay there. But if your pelvis cannot overly rotate, well, then your triangle stance needs to be a bit wider. And piece by piece, kind of building it from there.
And what that does is, it doesn't throw alignment out the window, but you're giving people tools to figure out what parts of that apply to them
Mm-hmm.
rather than like a universal set of rules.
Yeah.
It's more about like, look for this. What's happening? Okay, if this, then this. So people learn, what is applicable in my body today and maybe different tomorrow, but using those alignment cues is more like calls to awareness rather than some kind of like rigid thou shalt always do X.
Right. Right. Like knees over toes and not, you don't have to avoid knees over toes all the time. Those things are going to be okay. Sometimes it's okay to go outside and color outside the lines in terms of alignment and those awareness cues. And sometimes we do that as well, because that's how we build capacity and resilience in the body and in the joints. Passing the knees over toes, overly rotating. Sometimes it's helpful. But again, it has to be within the scope of what does it feel like in your body. If you feel like something's injured or getting hurt, then you shouldn't go there. And I like to teach, but I do like to teach the big poses, especially like the ones that are going to put me and people into end range of motion, like a twisting triangle with a really stable base, because there's just
Hmm.
so much moving. There's just so many chances to over wrench your body, that in end range poses, I think it is important to kind of keep some awareness of body position.
Hmm.
But if you're just teaching some lunges, and you're not, you know, going into an end range hip extension or flexion, then it's okay to explore all the different ways. But sort of, I think people get a lot of injuries when we try to push to that end range of motion in our hips and hamstrings and shoulders and spine.
Yeah, with that kind of being the goal, or especially when we're not really like prepared for it, or we haven't set up like that foundation that could support it and know what we're doing when we go there.
Yeah, yeah, and I think knowing what you're doing is important, especially as we continue to do this practice throughout our entire lives. I think if we want it to be sustainable and support us, it's it becomes more and more important to do it in a way that's going to be more protective of our body,
Hmm.
especially for women, as we age and we we start to become osteoporotic or penic for some of us, or if we've had babies. And I think postpartum lasts forever. If I tried to do a twisting triangle now, I would hurt tomorrow. It's just the nature of the way that the pelvis has shifted for me. And so I do think that there's just a lot more benefit um, in using our body in a more um, sort of efficient way in terms of strength and proprioception, um, and efficiency of our muscles.
I really liked what you were saying too about the sensations and developing more clarity about what they are, because I don't know, sometimes people are really like sensation and they kind of go after sensation. Other times people start to feel a sensation and they're like ouch. And it may not be pain, but it's just like any feeling registers that way at first. And so exploring this is really interesting to kind of distinguish between, okay, that's the sensation of a muscle working and contracting and engaging. Oh, that's the sensation of a stretch or lengthening or space. And then, this is a sensation that's pleasant. This is a sensation that's unpleasant. Is that a red flag? Is that not? And so we can start to like really make better choices when we have some guidance on like getting clear and to feel what those sensations mean to us and what they really are.
Yeah. I think sitting within sensations also is helpful, because you could feel something and you could label it quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So maybe you've done this where you've sort of bent over and your back was stiff or sore from waking up in the morning, and maybe someone would label that as, oh no, like my back is sore again. This is not good. I must have hurt my back. This is bad. But that's also an opportunity to pause and reflect and have a contemplative pause on, um, oh, that's normal back stiffness for the morning, and that's going to go away in a little while, and I should just breathe through it, and that's okay. Um, because I do think feeling sensations is one thing, labeling sensations is another thing,
Mm-hmm.
and how we label sensations is baked in to us from, our parents and our childhood and all of our past experiences and memories. And that's why pain science is very important to understand, but also very layered in human experience. The brain is good at sending sensations, but it's not great at sort of differentiating between pain and discomfort. And it's really up to us and that sort of executive function to start to delineate the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So teaching that in a yoga class, I think, is interesting and important, and can be done in a way that's explorative,
Mm-hmm.
um, where you have people sort of gently sit with sensations, push
It
them
becomes
to
like
the
their laboratory to understand this and a safe
yes,
place where
yeah,
next time they get out of bed and feel that stiff back, they can kind of go, oh, okay, well, this is like in yoga the other day when I was feeling my hamstring.
that's right,
And just kind of learn those skills of being with it in a new way.
that's right. Uh, Broken toe pose is a nice laboratory technique, right? Sitting with your toes tucked under on your knees in hero's pose.
Oh, like a toe squat. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. I was like, what's
because
broken toe pose?
yeah, because that causes discomfort.
Totally. It's
But for
intense.
most people, yeah, but for most people, it's not going to cause an injury.
Hmm.
Um, and so it is a uncomfortable situation to be in, and you could sort of explore what tools you may use to sustain that,
Hmm.
um, whether it's your breath or um, your awareness to your body, or maybe you're in a class and the fact that everyone else is experiencing it too as a tool, community.
Hmm.
So we do play with those 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 difficult things, in order to let people learn a little bit about how they sense and feel in their body's own barometer for sensation.
That's really cool. And in terms of how you weave together your main, modalities of physical therapy and yoga into like a physio yoga practice, what does that look like? What does a class like a physio yoga class look like? And like, do people realize where things are being drawn from, or is it just like this beautiful fusion? Like, what is it like?
That's a great question. It will be a little bit different depending on what teacher you would take class with. But we do try to bring awareness to the body, to focus on a theme. And some of the themes I've mentioned, like maybe it's tripod foot, or maybe it's floating scapula or shoulder blade, and that might be the point of the class. So let's say floating scapula is the theme of the class. We may begin the class with some release work. So maybe you're spending some time rolling out the muscles on the other side of the scapula or near the scapula. We would use some soft release balls. And the reason why we would do this is not to massage the muscles, but more to start to fire up the interoceptive awareness of that area. So maybe we're doing some release work to the pecs, which can get a little gunky and can hold the scapula in place. And so as we're doing the rolling, we're saying, imagine your pec is widening and softening during the rolling. And then from there, that cue of widening and softening of the pec that we did with the ball gets carried into class. Remember how that felt to widen and soften. And then we start to up-train the movement of the scapula, and that would be threaded through. And it would be threaded through with physical therapy principles of progression in mind. So first, maybe we would learn to do that in open chain, and then which would mean the end of the limb is free, and that would help with motor learning. And then we would go into closed chain, but at first we would be in all fours because that's less load on the body than if we were in a full plank or down dog. And so we would build up and progress. We would use motor learning, and that would be the repetition of the cues. You'd potentially get some bands or straps put on you to increase proprioceptive awareness, which would in turn help to continually rein the brain to that area that we're trying to retrain throughout class. And it could either build up to sort of a pose or just a flow, with really the focus being on that area of the body. There's also classes that we do where we sort of break down the poses. Some of the teachers do beautiful jobs at that. I myself really like to focus on the re-education parts where it's kind of like a physical therapy, more like my physical therapy sessions, where I would just start with bringing awareness to the body and then re-educating the area of the body through the sort of therapeutic part, which would be the first part of the class, to be more maybe like isolated exercises and massages, self-massages for proprioception, interoception, and then weave that into the flow, which is more of the functional training part and the motor learning part.
So you sort of, you like learn a skill and then you apply it in a little bit more of a complex set of movements. And that helps to kind of cement it in your brain and make it interesting and keep you on this like train of progressing from simpler and less loaded to more complex and more loaded. So you get stronger with it as you go.
You're great at this, Addie.
Thank you. Well, I feel so many similarities and things that I've learned over the years and kind of how I go about things as well. So it just makes sense to me what you're saying. And, maybe this next question is going to be a little too general, but maybe it also connects with all of this and some of what we were saying before about movement and prevention. But in my travels as a yoga teacher, not literally travels, but in my time, probably like the most common thing that people come to class and ask for or kind of complain about is tight hips. And I mean, there's a few of them that are up there, but tight hips is like a really common thing that people are looking for help with. And so I wonder, why you think hip tightness is such a common complaint, and is there something people could be adding to their movement repertoire that would help, or maybe like a different way of thinking about tight hips that might help as people approach this? And what do you think?
I think so many things.
I bet. It's a big question. Sorry.
That's okay. No, I love, this is one of my favorite topics. I think any sensation that we feel, like there is never just one, this is why. It's never just like, it's because you sit like that. No. I think in order to serve all the people who are telling you that they have tight hips, I think it's a very layered response. One of the things that's super interesting about this region is the homunculus. So
Mm-hmm.
the homunculus is this area in our motor and sensory cortices of the brain. And in this area of the brain, all of the feelings from the body are sent, and all of the orders for movement from the body are sent in the motor and sensory homunculus. Parts of the homunculus are really dense with a ton of connections and a ton of neurons and a ton of synapses. So just like a ton of activity, where that exactly correlates to how well we sense and get feeling from that area of the body, but also how well we can send really refined, specific signals of movement to that area of the body. So the areas that are associated with our survival, our mouth for eating, our tongue, our hands, those areas are huge in the homunculus. Ton of dense nervous signal information and activity. The trunk, the back, the hips is very low density of nervous signal, sensory information, and motor information. So it's pretty cloudy. Like it's kind of, we don't sense as deeply and as differentiated as we would in our fingers and our hands and our hips. And we also can't send super specific signals of movement to our hips like we would to our fingers. Like a piano player can move all of the fingers in many different ways. Our hips, it's
Super
kind of
refined.
clunky. Yeah, it's kind of clunky
Yeah.
in the hips. So so the information is not as clear. So tightness isn't always sort of a reflection of tightness. And that's because the sensory information is just not as well defined. Tightness might feel like tightness, but it's not as well defined.
It's like a sensation the brain is interpreting
Right.
as tightness, and part of that is like it's interpreting it with less refinement because there's just like less of a clear
Yeah.
telephone wire between the two, so to speak.
That's exactly right. And so that tightness could be just, it could also be the hips telling the brain, hey, we've not moved for a while. We need to move. Or, hey, it'd be great if we got some new blood flow in here. Could you move? Or, hey, these muscles, these muscles are really tense. Like they're really short. Could you move us a little bit?
It's like when you're watching Netflix and you watch too many in a row and it puts that thing up like, are you still here?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. Right. Or, hey, we don't feel super supported in this region. Could you do
Mm.
something about it? So I think tightness is the read on the sensation, but I don't think it's indicative of having short muscles around our hips.
It doesn't equal inflexible. There might be different reasons you could have that sensation of tightness.
Right. And we've all run into yoga teachers who tell us they have tight hips and kind of like flop into a pigeon or be in the biggest Anjaneyasana.
And you're like, I don't think so.
Right. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
you actually have a great range of motion.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you feeling that? And I think
Mm-hmm.
you may be feeling it because you need to be a bit more supported in that area,
And
which would
sometimes
mean,
people
yeah,
feel like if they say they have tight hips and you try to give them strengthening in that area, they feel a little bit like, oh no, you're going to make me tighter if we do that because they're equating strength with tight.
that's right. And initially, you may lose some range of motion or flexibility if you're not balancing the strength work with maintaining your mobility and flexibility. But I think a nice combination is to do strength work in the hips and active mobility work at the same time. So strength work would be, your hip bridges, your deadlifts, your clamshells, your squats, your donkey kicks, standing glute unilateral work, um, hip flexor strength with bands or weights. And then your active mobility work would be, actively trying to move your femur in the hip socket and all of the directions it can go. So exploring active hip flexion and active hip extension and active hip abduction and active hip adduction and internal and external rotation. And by doing that, you're sort of nourishing all of the tissues. You're creating blood flow, and you're jazzing up your synovial fluid in the joint. But you're
Jazzing
also
it up. I like that. I want jazzy synovial fluid.
And building strength and those things. Yeah. But if you do it with sort of intentional awareness, you can help maybe further define and refine your homunculus at the same time. And so then you'll get clearer signals.
And there's like a great image of the homunculus, which is, it looks like this freaky little cartoon character with huge lips and hands. And I'll put it like in the show notes for people if you haven't ever seen this character. Lives in your brain.
Yeah, we do so much in Physiyoga where we put bands and straps and balls and stuff on the hips and low back and trunk to try to just break through get more proprioception and interoception from those areas.
So you work with it in part by trying to increase awareness of that area. So there's a more of a connection, and maybe we can interpret the signals a little bit more accurately.
That's right.
And then we start to move and do strength and mobility work that can help shift whatever the pattern is that might be causing the tight hips.
That's right. Yeah. And just using them. And I think it's interesting once you start paying attention to how you live your life, why things may be happening. I mentioned doing the dishes. I don't know why, but recently I've started standing at the sink and like completely externally rotating my right leg and offloading it. And I'll notice it and I'll be like, why am I doing that? I have no idea why. But then I see my mom and my dad both do it. It's like, oh man. And but all that time I spend doing the dishes, I'm offloading my right leg. And that's that time in just standing on my left leg is time lost for my right leg to sort of have muscular activity and proprioception, and just be interacting with the ground and the force. And I think if people start paying attention to how they do the dishes or they wait online, it may be very insightful. Like, oh, wow, like I always stand on my left leg and my right leg's always tight, or vice versa. It's interesting to pay attention to how we do things.
I love that. And it's so clear that like your practice just, it comes into every moment that it can in your life. And you're always like bringing that awareness into the body with all the different activities you might be engaged in. So I think that's mindfulness. And that's just like a beautiful benefit of all these practices all on its own. Really is.
Yeah. I think the mindful piece of the movement, it's like the movement is just a vessel. Sometimes, I mean, yes, I think it's so important for women to build muscle mass and to move and keep mobility, and men as well, but really women don't push themselves to do that enough. I think they need to hear it. But you can bake the mindfulness into every movement you do, whether it's a goblet squat or a chest press or a lat pull down. I mean, that's you can be mindful throughout that and interoceptive.
I love that.
Yeah. Couple birds at once. Yeah. Two birds with one stone.
Yeah, it integrates all of this into, really the reason we're doing it, so we can live our lives and feel good and do the activities that we want to do and be with people and be present. And I think it's a wonderful combination of techniques and teachings and wisdom that you're bringing together. So thank you for being here today and sharing all of this knowledge with us.
Oh, it's so my pleasure. Thank you.
Where can people go to find out more about Physiyoga and your work and what you're up to?
Everything, you can find a lot about us on our website, threesphysiyoga.com. And we're also on Instagram often at threesphysiyoga. And I think that's the most important places. We're also on YouTube. and Facebook and LinkedIn, but I'm mainly on Instagram and the website.
I always enjoy your Instagram posts. There's lots
Thank you.
of little tidbits and good little pieces of knowledge that'll get you thinking and hopefully moving.
Cool. Yeah, it feels very silly, but it also feels very helpful. And I think a lot of people enjoy it. And that's the goal.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Diana. This has been a total pleasure to talk to you.
Me too, Addie.
So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend and or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.